Hi, I'm Norm Abram. Welcome to the New Yankee Workshop. Today we're going to add another piece to our mission-style furniture collection. It's a very modest writing desk, perfect for someone who has a laptop computer. For inspiration, we went to a gallery in downtown Boston, not far from here, where they specialize in arts and crafts, furniture and furnishings. We'll go there first, then we'll come back here and build that desk. That's next, right here in the New Yankee Workshop.
The New Yankee Workshop features the craftsmanship of Norm Abram.
Today we're in Boston at the JMW Gallery, and they specialize in craftsman-style furniture, lighting, pottery, and prints. Currently on display is this drop front desk, which is one of my favorites. A nice big writing surface and plenty of cubby storage. I also love this old iron hardware. Over here, a small trestle table. And in the base, this cutout is referred to as a mouse hole. I don't want to run into that mouse. There is no shortage of chairs, rockers and Morash-style chairs. There are plenty of arts and crafts settles. Now over here, we have a room screen that has a fabric and wood panel construction. But the piece that I wanted you to see is this one right here, this small desk. It's a Stickley original, and I'm told it was built between 1910 and 1915. Made out of quarter-sawn white oak, it has some classic details like these through tenons, plenty of drawers for storage, and down underneath here, look at this, a secret shelf in the knee hole. Now this piece is really meant to be seen on all sides. The panels are completely finished all the way around, so you could actually set this piece in the middle of a room. I think it's just the right size for a laptop computer these days. The only thing I would change is I think I would widen this knee hole a bit. It's a little bit tight, maybe 3 or 4 inches. But this would be a great piece to add to our collection. Here's our version of the Mission desk. Mission furniture came out of the arts and crafts movement, which occurred around the turn of the century. And it was in response to the machine-made, mass-produced furniture of the Victorian era. People like Gustav Stickley mass-produced pieces like this, but they wanted them to have the look of hand craftsmanship. Mission comes from the Franciscan missionaries out in California, where they had large pieces of oak furniture, although they look nothing like this. This is much more refined. I built our desk out of quarter-sawn white oak, which is a traditional material for arts and crafts pieces. You get these nice rays in the oak. I have a through tenon, which is a classic detail. Now I did open up this knee hole by about 6 inches, so there'll be plenty of room compared to that antique. I removed all the cubbies on the desk top because we're in a paperless society. We just want room for our computer. If you'd like to build your own Mission desk, a materials list and a plan is available. You'll hear more about that before the program ends. I want to start today with the top. So what I've done is selected some nice boards about 1 inch thick, and I've set up the way I want them laid out. I want to remove any bad material like this, and I want to joint these edges to get a nice joint for my glue up. For that, I'll use the joiner. Before we use any power tools, let's talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. And it's going to take a few passes through the joiner to straighten these out. Now these slots are for number 20 biscuits. And I like to use these because they'll add some strength to the joint, but they also make it easier to align the surfaces, so I'll have less sanding later. All right, now for the glue up, I'm just going to roll on a thin layer of glue on each side where the pieces meet. I've already put some glue in the biscuit slots, and I'll drop the biscuits in, and when we get it all together, we'll clamp it up. Now I'm just putting enough clamp pressure on to bring the joint together. I don't want to squeeze all the glue out. Look again at the prototype. The legs are 2 1/4 inches square to just below this tenon. Then they taper in both directions slightly. I made the blanks for the legs by gluing together two pieces of stock because it's difficult to get quarter-sawn oak in this size. I've laid out for mortises this through mortise as well as a mortise to receive this side rail. Same thing happens on the back leg. Now I'm going to use my dedicated mortiser. I have a 1/2-inch chisel. The bit in the center of the chisel removes most of the material and the chisel squares it up. Now this is the location of one of the through mortises. I have enough depth on the chisel to go all the way through, but I don't want to do that because it could blow out on the other side. So I come in from each face. Let's take another look at the prototype and see how this panel intersects with the legs. It actually fits into a groove, both at the back and the front. The groove looks like this. It goes between the mortises. This is for the other end. I'll show you how to make this one. To make that groove, I've set up my router table with a 1/4-inch spiral bit. And what I'm going to do is drop this mortise right over the bit, start it up, and run it to the other mortise. Our desk is really made up of a series of panels, rails, and sometimes stiles with 1/4-inch solid panels. There's one on each end, a nice long panel at the back of the desk, and a panel that's on each side of the knee hole. We'll start on those next. I want to make the grooves for the panels first, so I've set up the dado for a 1/4-inch width. I've put a featherboard in place which will keep the stock tight against the fence as I push it through. Now I've carefully set the blade as close to the center of my stock as possible, but to be sure I'm going to turn the stock around and make a second pass, and that'll guarantee that that groove is in the center. Now I've widened the dado, installed my sacrificial fence, and by making 2 passes, I can create a tenon which will fit into those grooves I machined earlier. For the last few minutes, I've been setting up to make tenons on any of these rails that meet the leg. There are short 1-inch tenons at the top of the leg, and down here on the side panel, there's a through tenon which is 2 3/8 inches long. They're all made the same way. The first thing that I do is set up to make the shoulder cuts on each face. And for that I have a stop block which determines the length of the tenon, and I've set the blade only 1/8 of an inch above the table saw surface. I'll make those cuts first. Now I've simply raised the blade to 3/8 of an inch above the table to nip away the material at the top and bottom of the tenon. Finally, I make the cheek cuts, which will complete each tenon. And the best way to do that is to use my tenoning jig, which holds the piece safely in a vertical position while I run it through the saw. Well, now I can begin to glue up some of these panel sub-assemblies. Now for a panel, and that drops into the groove, and that's set dry, no glue. We want it to be able to move. Now this is part of one of the panels that goes in the knee hole, and I put the center stile in first. Now I can slide in the panels, and then I'll glue the ends on. Now I went through all the trouble of dry fitting these pieces together to make sure all the tenons in the rails fit properly in the legs. I also want to make sure that the groove that I made in the legs for the panel lines up with the grooves that are in the rails, and that's good. I also want to get an overall measurement between the side panels and an overall depth from this back rail to the front of the legs so that I can properly cut this knee hole panel. Now this is the panel that I made up for that knee hole, and I made it just like I glued up the top, except it's only 3/4 of an inch thick. Now before I leave tonight, I'll lay it out and size it. Tomorrow we should have no problem finishing our mission desk. Well, good morning. Last night before I left the shop, I did complete sizing that oak panel for the bottom. I also took some time to build some dust frames. Now there are 3 of them. One for this drawer, one for this one, and one for this drawer. And the edge of the plywood is covered with some solid oak. They're made with 3/4 inch plywood, and just like the panels that I made yesterday, I make a groove in one piece, form tenons on the adjoining piece, put some glue in there, and then pin it with some brads that holds it in place while the glue sets. Now that those are made, I need a place in the legs to set those pieces. So I've ganged the 4 legs together. That gives me a wider base for my router, and I know everything lines up. Here's the layout for some dados. Now to set up the router, I need a guide. So what I like to do is I use the straight edge of the router, and I make up a gauge, and that gauge is the distance from the edge of the router to the edge of the bit. Now I don't have to do any measuring. I simply use the gauge. I set it over my line, slide my straight edge up to the line, and lock it in place. I'm using a straight cutting bit, and I'm going to a depth of 1/4 inch. Now I've set up the bottom panel, same setup, a straight edge, same router bit, to make a dado for this vertical panel in the knee hole. Here I'm setting up one of the panels for the knee hole. They also need dados. One on the inside to receive this dust frame, one on the outside to receive this one. This panel gets the same treatment. Now that dado that I just milled in the bottom rail of the back panel is going to receive that oak shelf. It's the only dado that's not stopped in this whole project, so I use the table saw. Of course, you could do it with the router as well. Now there's a whole series of notches that I have to make in the panels and in those frames to fit into the dados. This one, for instance, is going to go around the leg. There's another one at this back corner that goes around the leg. Now all the details for these notches will be clearly spelled out in the plan. I'll use a hand saw to do some of them, a jigsaw for others, and some I'll even nibble away at the table saw. Now I'm doing a partial dry fit, the back legs, the back panel, and our oak bottom. And that's because I want to locate some dados that go in these styles. It's a lot more accurate than measuring. Okay, now that completes the cutout of our knee hole. I want to smooth up that edge. It would be a little tough at the stationary drum sander, but this little portable one should do the job. At this point, we're ready to complete the legs. I want to taper the bottom, as I mentioned earlier. It goes from about here and both sides down to the bottom, and from both sides down to the bottom on that corner. I'll show you how I do that. The first step is to set up my tapering jig to taper 2 sides. I'll do one on this side and then turn it 90 degrees and do another side. At this point, I have 2 sides of the leg tapered. I want to taper the other 2 sides, so I have to make an adjustment to my jig. I'm going to take one of the tapered edges and put it against the jig. I'm going to slide the whole fence out of the way so I can expose the miter slot, which I'm actually going to use as a guide. And I want to open up the jig just a little bit, and then I'm going to bring it to the miter gauge slot. Let's see how I'm doing. I want this line, which is where I want the taper to start, to line up with the edge of the slot, and I want this 1/4 inch removal line to also be on the inside edge of the slot. Now that's pretty good. Now I have to bring it to the saw blade. So I slide the whole assembly over and just bring it to the blade where I want the taper to start. I might leave it a little strong. I can always move the fence again. That's great. A leg that's tapered on all 4 sides. Next, I want to get rid of the burn marks and smooth up the cut on the taper, I'm going to use my oscillating edge sander. The ends of these through tenons need to be rounded over a bit. It would be very difficult to do once it's assembled. So all I really do is take a block of sandpaper on some wood, and I just round over the corners until I get them where I want. And now I'm ready to build some sub-assemblies. This is one of the ends of the desk, and I've put glue in the mortises and on the tenons, and once again the panel goes in dry, and we'll clamp it up. Next, I'm going to install the dust frame for the center drawer into the vertical panels of the knee hole. And that gets glue and a couple brads. Next, I'm going to install the assembly that I just made into the bottom panel of the desk. And I'm only going to glue about the first 6 or 7 inches of this dado. There's a cross-grain situation here. And if I lock these pieces together, this could split. I'm going to let the back move about freely. Now here's the back panel, and that's going to go on next. I'm only putting glue where the panel meets those partitions I just installed. I don't want glue in the groove that will receive the bottom. I want that bottom to move freely. Now it's time for these dust frames that go at the side of the desk to support the drawer. Now I can slide in the remaining back panels. There's a little one on each end. Now it's time for the ends. More glue on the tenons and in the mortises. Now I just got to get it to all fit together. Now here's my top, cut to size and all sanded smooth. I've just put a radius on the corners so they're not sharp, and now I'll treat the rest of the edge with a tight radius bit, both on the top and the bottom. I'm going to add this cleat on the underside of our bottom shelf. It's going to add a little stiffness to it. It's just sitting on this lower stile. One dab of glue in the middle, however. I do want to let this thing still move and contract with changes in humidity. Now with the desk right side up, I need to install a couple more guides for the drawers. When the drawer goes in, if I don't have a guide between the legs, it gets crooked in the opening. So what I'm going to do is put in a couple cleats, one underneath the dust frame, one on top. And I can't see very well under there, so I'm going to take this scrap of plywood and I'm going to just hold it in place with a spring clamp. Now I can just take my piece, slip it up against that cleat, and nail it from up above. All right, now for one on the top. And set it in there, remove my little straight edge. I don't need a clamp this time. I just butt the two pieces together and nail that one in place. Now a piece of solid oak to cover up the front edge of these small dust frames. A little glue and brads will hold it in place. These little clips are going to secure the top to the base. Now with the base positioned on the top, I'm marking the holes in each of the clips. If I were to secure it now, we would have a space between the top and the base. If I make a counterbore, everything will come tight. Now with the lower part of the desk removed, I can take a clip, put it over the mark I just made, trace the outline. Now, as long as the counterbore takes in that whole outline, the piece will sit flush. I have a scrap of wood. I just center it over the tracing, take my drill with a Forstner bit, and drill down about 1/8 of an inch. Now we can secure everything with a few screws. This is one of the drawers from the prototype, and I want to show you how they go together. Solid oak front, dovetails in the side, pins on the front. The back of the drawer sits in a dado, and all the pieces get a groove for this plywood bottom. I want to start out by making the dovetails on the side pieces. So I've set up my dovetailing jig, spaced the dovetails the way that I want them, and I'm going to use my router, which is equipped with a collar and a dovetailing bit. The collar will follow the jig, the bit does the work. With the tails cut in the side pieces, I'm now going to take the drawer front, slide that in the top of the jig up against the stop, lock that down, and then I'm going to turn the fingers of the jig over to set them in the pin mode. And once that's adjusted, I'll route the pins in the front. That 1/4 inch groove in each piece is for the plywood bottom. This dovetail joint gets its strength from its shape and all the multiple surfaces to which I can apply glue. No nails necessary. Okay, now I'm ready for the bottom, which goes in dry. And now the back. And then we'll secure that with a few nails. A little more sanding, and this piece will be ready for the finishing room. It's a nice project. Now, to get an arts and crafts look on our mission desk, we've experimented with several different techniques, and this one seems to work the best. What I'm doing now is applying an alcohol-based stain. It's simply pigment mixed in alcohol, and it seems to penetrate the wood very deeply. Now, let me show you a sample that I made up. Here's the piece of oak with the alcohol stain right here. You can see it's very light and sort of orange. Once that dries, I go over it with an oil-based stain, a dark walnut color, and finally I seal it with polyurethane, and it really brings out the rays in that 1/4 sawn oak. Now, after that alcohol stain dried, the next step is to put on this oil-based stain. It's a dark walnut color, and what it's going to do is unify the different tones of the wood underneath, and it's really going to bring out the highlights of our 1/4 sawn oak. I put on a coat with a brush, as even as possible, and once it sets for a few minutes, like it has on the other side here, I'll just take a rag and wipe it and rub it in, and you can see that we're starting to get that nice, dark oak mission color. For the final protective coats on our desk, I'm using a wipe-on poly. This is the satin sheen, and I've just taken a piece of cotton cloth and folded it up, and I'm using it like a squeegee. Just wipe it on, nice thin coat, there'll be no lap marks. Let it dry for about an hour, and then I can put on another coat. 3 coats should do the job. And here it is, with many coats of satin polyurethane, ready for your laptop computer. Now, this is a nice arts and crafts project to add to our collection. Now, let me show you what we're going to build next time. It's called a gardener's dry sink. We got the idea from a designer's show house. It was in the flower cutting room. Now, we think this is a great project for the keen gardener to use inside or out, and I'll show you how to build one next time right here in the New Yankee Workshop.
If you enjoyed this New Yankee project, please visit our website at newyankee.com for a complete online catalog of all the other projects you've seen Norm build here in the New Yankee Workshop.